Welcome to Retech, and today we're just going to cover a comment that's a nice person actually left on my previous video about repairing this Commodore 64. Now this machine was in a bit of a state. I mean, it still needs sorting, but you know, it's running and it works. And as you can see in the background, we've still got Monty on the Run playing there quite merrily. Now there was a bit of a comment about the fix that was done on this, and basically the comment was that, you know, the error that was previously on this could have been an interpreter error, which is right, because that's what I would have expected, or a processor fault, which would have triggered the interpreter error, and that was almost certainly what the textbook says, and almost certainly what the schematics would say, but we've got to think a little bit outside the box with these machines that are starting to age. And what I mean by thinking outside the box with one of these is because these are not current machines, these are quite old, and some of them, you know, some of the classic machines are getting on for 50 years old. You know, the average one now is about 40 years old, and they were only designed for a lifespan of about 5 to 10 years, and that's due to the components that were used inside of them. And because of this, we get random failures, and failures that aren't on the original data sheet, failures that aren't on the original spec sheet either. And following the spec sheet's great for kind of trying to troubleshoot, but sometimes you can't do the troubleshooting via the guide, because the biggest thing with that is that it doesn't account for processors and ICs that are degrading. So what I mean by this is, when you have a machine that's got 40-year-old silicon inside of it, you've got errors creeping in. Because you've got to remember, you've got electrons that are powering through these little tiny chips here at the speed of light. And every now and again, the electrons don't get to their designation or their destination, and they actually impact everything within these machines. And by that I mean is basically what will happen is the photons will carry on through and they won't trigger their gate. They will miss their gate. They will not flip anything. They will embed. Literally, it's like hitting a wall, and that will build up in the same way that, you know, calcium builds up inside of a human body, and eventually it causes problems. Now this can all be seen under a microscope, a really heavy-duty microscope, but you know, most people don't have that kind of stuff. So what we need to do is just go through the troubleshooting arc and then try and find a way of making these things run. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the working VIC-2 out of here and replace it with the original VIC-2 that came with this machine, just to kind of prove a little bit of a point, really, that sometimes you have to think outside of the box. It's the same with the ZX Spectrum. These things, the ULA goes bad on these. It basically, it either goes deaf or it appears to be working fine, and you get other problems creeping in. And you know, that's not in the textbooks, that's not in the schematics. That's, if you follow it through, you would never ever find that the ULA has an issue, because it's something that you wouldn't be able to pick up through schematics or through their original documentation. And that's the same with any of these older machines. So I'm going to turn this off and I'm going to swap the chip around. Okay, so let's get rid of Monty on the Run for a second. Right, so we're going to remove the cover for the part of the shielding, and it's also got a heat sink on it as well, so you really need to keep this on there. But in this short-term test, we should be okay. Right. Because this was unplanned, I'm just going to use a small screwdriver to lever out. And I'm going to pop it down to one side. Now we're going to replace this one. This was the original that was in this board. Just going to make sure all of the pins are lined up first. Okay, so gently place it in the socket. Now I'm going to keep the cover off. We've got the arm SID still there, and way too much paste on that one really. And I'm just going to connect it up again, just to show you that it's actually working. So we're basically going to connect this up, we're going to load in Monty on the run again, and we're basically going to see what happens. Okay, so we're just going to fasten up the keyboard now and the case, and we're going to power it on, and we're going to start to load Monty on the run again. Okay, so we're just going to turn the machine on, and we're just going to load in the game. And this is what we get. We get this every single time when you try and load anything into memory on this, or game, or anything complex. Now I can put a smaller game on and it will work perfectly. Basically what it's doing is giving an erroneous error, if you pardon the pun. It's basically a switch inside the processor, a gate so to speak, and basically what it will do is it will be sending the wrong information, and everything else that it's actually connected to is getting this error. So when it tries to process something, this error is coming up. So it's quite an unusual fault, but you know, I have seen it before, which is why I didn't think it was the processor, and I really didn't think it was the SID chip, because the ARM SID was quite a new device in this machine. So this is what it looks like now. I'm just going to swap the original VIC-2 over, and we're going to load the game again. Okay, so I'm just going to button the machine up and get it ready to run. It has the VIC-2 that works. It's an older CPU. It's out of a generation of board before this, but it works and it's fine. So we're just going to stick with this one because it does work. So let's get it buttoned up and have a good look at it. So now we're just going to load the program in again. So as you can see, it's running fine without the dead or the damaged VIC-2 chip in there. So again, it's not the fact that following directions and following schematics and following the process of how these machines were built is wrong. It's not. It's right. It's completely right. But the problem is, even when I'm at work and we have to sort of diagnose and repair something, if it's older than maybe 10 years, it's time. I mean, from a commercial standpoint, it's time for it to go. That's it. It's had its day. Because once they get to that point with some of the components, they are basically scrap. It takes far too long to diagnose and replace all of the faulty components, whether or not it's related to the actual fault or not. And that's the biggest problem here. What we have here is a technology and components that are 40 to 50 years old. If there's something wrong in here because of degradation inside of the package, then whatever's being literally fired out or in from these pins is going to be wrong as well. So you can only work with the data you get. So if you're hitting the wrong gates, or the gates aren't opening, or they're flip-flopping, or the ones are becoming zeros, etc., then everything else is going to be completely out of whack. Now, this is an unusual fault because I've only ever seen this twice, and that's only when these machines got over 30 plus years old. Before then, I'd never seen that. I'd never seen that fault occur any time. Okay, so we've got Monty on the Run running, and basically it's not a fault that comes up very often. The original faulty VIC chip is here, and it's be consigned to the scrap bin because the problem we got is these machines are aging badly. 40 to 50 years old are a lot of these classic machines, and these components were designed for a maximum lifespan really of about 10 years, along with all of the other components that are in this machine. Now, following schematics and following process is brilliant, and it would point to a error with the basic ROM or an error with the processor causing the basic ROM to error. So, that's brilliant diagnosis, but the problem is, if you have misfiring electrons in here which are basically embedding themselves and not switching the gates, everything from these pins onwards is going to be incorrect. So bad data in, bad data out, or garbage in, garbage out is effective when you have a processor or a chip that's breaking down. It can't literally process what you're asking it to do. And these aren't alone. These machines aren't alone. They're the ZX Spectrums have the same fault, very similar faults actually. The Commodore VIC-20 has other faults related to chips degrading and breaking down. Remember, this bit of silicon was never really designed to last for as long as it did, and there's many heat cycles and power ons and offs, etc., that they've done in their lifetime. Plus, they may look sealed to you, but I'll guarantee they bring in moisture and they start wrecking the chips inside of them, because these really aren't as sealed as most people think. They do degrade through heat, moisture, and basically anything else that will cause any other machine to degrade. So we have to start thinking a little bit outside of the box when we get random errors. I've only seen this error twice. This is the second time, and luckily, from the first time it took me ages to find the fault because I went down the similar routes, but luckily I kind of knew roughly what the problem was on this occasion. So, it's one of those things, we're trying to keep old things running, same as old anything, old cars, old aeroplanes, old trains, old anything at all. And we just have to go with it and invent new rules and new ways of keeping these machines running. So it's quite happy, and it's quite ironic that we've got an older VIC-2 in there, which is functioning better than a slightly more modern one, but it's just the luck of the draw when they get to this age. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy this, and I hope to see you again soon. Please subscribe. See you.